My name is Alyssa Whitcraft. I am a professor at the University of Maryland, but I'm also the Deputy Director and Program Manager of NASA Harvest, which is NASA's Food Security and Agriculture program. So agriculture is the hallmark of human society. It's what has allowed us to develop all the other wonderful things that we have. It keeps every one of us alive, whether or not we are aware of our connection to the land that's being utilized to produce the food that we consume. Um, Unfortunately, every year since 2015, we've had increasing numbers of people who are food insecure, meaning that they don't have sufficient access to the food that they need that's of good quality nutrition, that's consistent throughout the year. NASA Harvest has three objectives, really, which is to increase our understanding of and also strengthen these things inherently, being agricultural productivity, agricultural sustainability, and in general, our land stewardship around agricultural land.
I am going to focus my talk today on the use of satellite data. After all, NASA Harvest is NASA's Food Security and Agriculture program, and we're all about utilizing Earth data collected in space for down to earth information on agriculture. So, satellite data, in case you're not aware, some characteristics are that it is synoptic, it's objective, it's timely, and it's repeatable. And these are things that all make it super valuable considering that agriculture covers about 40% of the land surface and changes meaningfully within days to weeks. That means it's really difficult to collect on the ground data, and it can provide a really important accompaniment to those field data that we can collect. I want to first emphasize up front we can't make satellite data useful without the ground data, but it still has a lot of value to add.
So, NASA began its investment in agricultural monitoring utilizing satellites basically from the very first satellites that were flown to observe Earth. So in 1972, they launched what became later known as Landsat 1, kind of colloquially, but its real name was ERTS 1 or Earth Resource Technology Satellite 1. And this was in 1972 that it was launched, close to 50 years ago now. And basically, some of the earliest experiments for the use of that data were actually partnerships with USDA and other federal agencies, and they were really geared toward understanding what was going on with agriculture in the world. If I can take a step back, I'll say what precipitated that event and that the need for that information critically was an event called the Great Grain Robbery. What happened was there was a grain shortage in one of the main bread baskets in the world, which is Russia, or at the time the USSR. And if I'm recalling the story correctly, they purchased a bunch of grain from the US. The seasons are kind of off, right? And so they purchased the grain from the U.S. And then when the U.S. went to go buy Russian grain, there wasn't any, and so we purchased back our own grain that we had grown in the United States for something like 10 times the price. And so there was a recognition that that couldn't have happened, that wouldn't have happened had we had knowledge about what was actually going on in the major agricultural areas of the world with respect to production. And so it becomes really critical to have the information that can be utilized to prevent speculation in the market and drive large fluctuations in the prices of crops. And satellite data are really useful for that. It wasn't until the sort of early 2000s that there started to be a shift toward recognizing that we're collecting this satellite data and sticking it in archives, and by not making it free and publicly available, we were really limiting its utility and its function. And so, with the vision of many people that kind of came to a head under the leadership of Barbara Ryan at USGS, they decided, you know what, let's make the Landsat archive freely and openly available for all of these different applications. And actually, that kind of precipitated some of the development of things in private sector like Google Earth and Google Maps that we utilize so heavily today. So fast forward, NASA's been investing in agriculture in terms of its satellite monitoring activities for about 40 years, come around 2011, 2012. And yet there wasn't a program to tie all of these activities together. It was a series of research projects and a series of research activities, but nothing kind of pulling the whole piece together to, which is often necessary to have vision in the future to push things really forward technologically. And so the folks within NASA's Applied Science Division, Lawrence Friedel and Brad Dorn, had a lot of vision here and said, you know, we really need a program to push this forward.
We aim to improve agricultural land use, sustainability, and productivity by advancing our products and the underlying methods to produce the products, which again, these are public good, right? Because we are a NASA program, in 5 core areas: crop mapping, crop statistics, crop yield, crop condition, and cropping practices. So that's everything from where the agriculture is, how that's changing through time, what's going on with agriculture in the current season, what's going to be going on in future seasons, how are people utilizing their land, how has that changed over time. Those are all the kind of questions that we're looking for sort of physical evidence of with our satellite instruments and trying to understand large patterns, meaning, and develop actionable information. And we do this all over the world, from subfield to global scale. So highly, highly integrative and highly multi-scalar work with a lot of potential impact areas.
Agriculture is inherently sort of a private enterprise, and it's really critical to be able to partner with the private sector in order to kind of drive technology and agriculture forward. And that's not something that historically has been really easy for large federal agencies in the US.
Those goals that I laid out in that kind of trapezoidal diagram, we reach those through strong partnerships with folks from around the world working on a really large set of topics. I don't have time to talk about all of them today, so instead I'm going to focus on what we're doing in our domestic agriculture work, and particularly what we do in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. This busy slide shows you at a glance what we are doing in the US. And there are kind of 6 areas where we focus, not geographical areas, but sort of thematic or impact areas. We work to support USDA, and that's not just in their domestic work, actually. We work with, Foreign Agriculture Service or Office of the Chief Economist, looking at what's happening worldwide, because we truly are a part of a global food and global climate system. So even what's happening in the US is highly relevant internationally, and what's happening internationally is highly relevant in the US. We also work a lot on private sector innovation. We have a lot of public-private partnerships and aim to sort of improve their ability to manage the land or the relationships they have with landowners in ways that are sustainable and resilient to extreme weather events and forward-looking into future years. And so a quick pause to say there's, not a real universally accepted definition of what it is for something to be considered regenerative. But the working definition that we have is a collection of locally appropriate cropland and rangeland practices, management practices that aim to stop and reverse soil erosion, enhance ecosystem services and watershed health, reduce the need for chemical and biological inputs, and contribute to increased farm resilience, productivity, and continuity into the future.
So there are many practices that farmers can take to more sustainably manage their crops. These include reduced tillage or no tillage. One of the techniques that farmers can utilize is cover cropping, which is applied either throughout the entire year permanently to kind of support general soil health, or applied during the winter to prevent the runoff of nitrogen and other fertilizers and things that have been applied to the crops.
And so I've listed just a handful of practices here. There's so much more than this, but what's really critical is we lack the methods to both detect the practices at scale and model their outcomes quantitatively at scale, not to mention the baselines. And so in this vein, because we know that we need better information at every level of the agricultural value chain, from inputs through consumers, we need this information to kind of empower the transition of farming at large scales to regeneration, healing the soil, healing the land community, which I attribute to Abe Collins, that phrase, and reaching net negative emissions. So this information really needs to be evidence-based, robust, synoptic, objective, timely, repeatable, those key characteristics of satellite data that I outlined at the beginning. And that's why we've sort of launched this Sustainable and Regenerative Agriculture Initiative, which is a public good, nonprofit, multi-stakeholder, pre-competitive forum that's really aims to make regenerative agriculture an implementable reality. And so it's pulling together common yardsticks, really driven by public interest, transparent science. And that's kind of what it's all about.
We do have to feed potentially 10 billion people by 2050, and we have to figure out a way to do it without endangering our native ecosystems, our natural ecosystems, and all of the different life that depends upon the land that we all share. And so one of the things that remote sensing and satellite data can be really useful for is showing what works and showing what doesn't work in farms. If somebody adopts a new practice, does it have the desired outcome? So if somebody wants to adopt no-till, does it actually improve their soil health? Does it reduce the runoff of fertilizer? Making the value proposition to farmers as to why taking on new techniques that may be more complicated or require different machinery or inputs than they already have, they need evidence that it's not going to impact their yields negatively. They need evidence that it's going to have the outcomes in increasing soil health or at least reducing soil degradation. They need evidence that they're going to be able to manage their lands in a way that's going to be kind of coherent with the way that they've always wanted to manage the lands. And so a really neat thing that remote sensing can do, because we have such a very deep time record, and it's also very synoptic, meaning that we can get large areas of coverage, is we can look at the impact of these practices over time. We can look for, first of all, the evidence of these practices occurring, and then look at, say, changes in yield that are experienced over time. If somebody institutes a reduced or no-tillage system, can they rely on a decline in yields, an increase in yields? Will their yields stay about the same? And what about in terms of other metrics of soil health? Some of those things we can measure with remote sensing. A lot of them we utilize models in tandem with the remote sensing information to get to the bottom of that question. But essentially, we need to utilize all the data that we have in our hands to really build a strong evidence base that farmers would utilize to help make decisions about how they want to manage their land, and what are the pros and cons for their individual ecosystem.
So I'll give you a couple of examples of things we have going on. This is an example of one of the SARA projects. Jill Dines at Stanford looked at tillage intensity over 2005 to 2016, and then yields over the same croplands from 1999 to 2018, and basically found that no-till provided yield benefits, especially in areas with particularly dry summers, and those yield benefits were most commonly witnessed after about 11 years. And so that's an important consideration as well. You can't expect the yield benefits to come in straight away. This is another project we have with CropX, a private company. They have in situ soil moisture monitors. They're trying to figure out where in the field do we place them and how do we develop continuous maps of soil moisture across entire fields. Soil moisture is a critical input for farmer decisions about irrigation, for the applications of different crop protections, and for the prediction of crop yield. But it's not available at suitable spatial and temporal scales from satellite data. By fusing ground data and satellite remote sensing data, though, you're able to create higher resolution, hopefully more accurate and more granular looks at this that are highly valuable for farmer decision making. And then this is a brand new project that we have just getting going in France. It's an evaluation of countrywide field scale nitrogen consumption. And it's really looking at satellite data over a number of fields in France to assess both where there's suboptimal fertilization and over-fertilization, and looking at what the environmental and economic costs are, not just the physical, but also getting to the human dimension of the over-fertilization in these regions.
This information can actually feed into a learning system that the farmers can rely on to help them understand, okay, if I take this decision at this point in the season, what are the expected outcomes? What can I look forward to? And that's something that remote sensing can really be useful in elucidating. we do have a genuine opportunity to both mitigate the changes that happen and improve our agricultural system's resilience to them. A lot of different pieces need to move. I mean, agriculture is fundamentally a human natural system, and it's a lot of private landowners need to be making a lot of decisions that are in their benefit, but also with the benefit of society in mind.
So I'll close by saying we're in a new era for remote sensing, for climate smart agriculture, for data integration and computation, for scaling and generalizing results, and for cross sectoral collaboration. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Globally, more than 570 million households farm small plots of land to earn income. Yet many of these farmers live in poverty. One major barrier for smallholder farmers is the lack of access to actionable information they can use to adopt improved farming practices and make more informed management decisions. Evidence from randomized evaluations in Kenya and India demonstrated how mobile phones could be a much more cost-effective and efficient way to deliver the personalized information farmers needed to increase their yields and to optimize their practices.
Evidence-based policymaking is tremendously important in all fields, but perhaps especially in agriculture. And so to do that, we felt it was necessary to build an organization that systematically conducted RCTs, A/B tests, and data collection in a variety of settings to build an evidence base about what works and what doesn't work.
Building on this evidence, in 2016, an organization called Precision Agriculture for Development, PAD, was established as a nonprofit with a mission to support smallholder farmers in low and middle-income countries.
So we found intriguing results that extremely low-cost information could change farmer behavior and improve farmer outcomes. But we didn't want those results to just sit as academic papers forever. So Michael Kramer and I and Dan Bjorkegren and Heiner Baumann got together and founded PAD with the mission of refining, developing, and delivering high-quality agricultural advice to 100 million smallholder farmers worldwide. JPAL and IPA have been really important partners as PAD has grown, and we work with them closely, utilizing their expertise in conducting RCTs. They've played a really important role, for example, in connecting to us with the government of Odisha, where we're currently working with them to serve over 1 million farmers.
We use mobile phone-based extension because it's low cost, it's scalable, and the ability to tailor information to each individual's crop conditions, where they live, what language they speak, what kind of technology they're comfortable with, is what makes this model impactful and exciting.
Since its launch in 2016, PAD has rapidly expanded into new geographies and widened their scope of research.
PAD's model of information delivery is not specific to agricultural extension. And there's so much information out there from which poor people could benefit, but all kinds of frictions in systems and governments and markets make it very difficult for them to access that information. So I think PAD's role will continue to be exploring and finding new ways of reducing these barriers across agricultural value chains and also beyond agriculture.
PAD's experience demonstrates the value of randomized evaluations to launch more effective approaches to reducing poverty on a global scale.
Another benefit of conducting RCTs is that it gets the researchers really close to the problem and really close to the farmers. We spend time in the field, our staff spends time in the field, and you really understand the constraints and optimizations and even the hopes and dreams of the farmers you're working with. And I think all of that also helps us as an organization credibly convey our findings to policymakers.
PAD has served 3.56 million farmers across 9 countries in Africa and South Asia, in collaboration with 27 partners. In 2020, the nonprofit assessment group GiveWell identified PAD as a standout charity, in part due to their commitment to ongoing research and transparency. In 2021, PAD was renamed Precision Development, or PXD, to reflect their growing scope of research and policy impact. PXD continues to experiment, iterate, and gather evidence on impact to improve service delivery and support people living.
As a major grain-producing area in China, Henan Province has actively explored the construction of smart farmlands. Zhou Huiyi, who has planted more than 100 mu of farmland, showed a smart irrigation system at his farmland in Zhujiang village of Sichuan County.
现在浇地方便的很了，我利用手机，这个就对着手机这个中间喊一下，这个中间它就下载有这个软件，想浇哪个灌区，一喊它水就出来了。这个想停，一喊它都有停下落下去了。原来不浇水的话，那基本上跟望天手一样，那都是600斤左右，800斤都封顶了。现在都是说是能达到1000至1200，最低我跟你说1000斤有保障，增产增收。
In 2022, the local authorities of Zhechuan County in Henan Province has invested in the construction of a 1,000 mu smart farmland project to apply 5G and IoT technologies to boost agricultural production. Combined with the monitoring data, farmers can remote control irrigation and fertilization by app without going to the field themselves.
这几种监测设备的，通过综合分析，通过大数据综合分析，然后传输到控制室，然后呢可以对这个作物的，这对提高这个农作物产量是有很大作用的。
We never used any fertilizer. We would reuse seeds from previous harvest. And this was not really because we wanted to just cling on to our old practices, but rather we didn't have access to credit, to information on how to improve our farming. And so from a very young age, I decided that I need to acquire skills that will help me start addressing these challenges. The normal youth does not want to wake up every morning with a hoe and go digging the farm. They want more interesting things. They want to be able to set up greenhouses, monitor their greenhouses remotely using their mobile phones, access financial services via technology. So technology really is key to actually engaging the youth more in agriculture. We've built a technology platform that captures data on the farmers that then financial institutions use to lend to farmers to make the lending decision to build better products for the farmers. Most of these farmers actually do not need a lot of money to actually turn their lives around. They could need as little as just $10 to buy quality inputs at the beginning of the season and good fertilizer, and that just changes everything for them. I want to see a world where hunger is a thing of the past, where extreme poverty is something that we no longer know, and there is enough employment to actually engage, especially the youth. And given that we have the right conditions, we have enough arable land, our climatic conditions are still favorable for agriculture.